Hello and welcome to knowledgebank.pro. Today we're working with top performers and learning about generate and TopN functions. Let's take a look at our dataset. It's very simple. We have only 4 columns. For every record, we would like to know what date it is, what product was sold, who was the salesperson who sold it, and for how much. As you can see, the model is very simple. We have our sales table in the middle, surrounded by date, product, and salesperson. So a traditional star schema. And as usual, I put all of my calculations into a metrics table. And before I jump into the tutorial, as usual, I will post all of the materials on my blog. So look for the link to the blog in the description of this video. Okay, and now we're ready to take a look at what problem are we trying to solve. So we know that we will be working with top performers. The question is, how do we define a top performer? In my case, a top performer is a salesperson with the highest sales per week. This will present a little bit of a problem for us because all of our sales are recorded daily, but we're gonna dedicate a top performer based on weekly sales. So what I'm trying to figure out is, for all of my salespeople, how many times did each salesperson manage to become a top performer? In other words, was the highest selling salesperson in this calendar week? And that's what we're going to try to answer in this chart here to the right. And in the bottom chart, what we're doing is, for every week, we know that there is a top performer, top salesperson. So for every week, what I want to know is who that top salesperson was and what was his or her sales that week. So before I jump into calculation, let's make sure that we all understand the desired behavior. So here in this chart, we see that Sarah is our top salesperson. She was a top performer 17 times. So 17 weeks was when she was number 1. And then John only managed it 2 times. And we see for every salesperson how many times in 2020 each of them was a top performer. Now, if I click on Sarah, in the bottom chart, I see all of the weeks where she was number 1. So it says that Sarah has a count of 17, so there are 17 weeks here in the list. John here only managed to do it twice, so these are the weeks in which he was number 1. To make things more interesting, we also want to be able to do it by an individual product. So here, if I pick a product A, for example, we see that Sarah was top salesperson for this product 12 times. Product B, she was top 13. Product C, actually Kathy was the number 1 salesperson, and Sarah dropped all the way to spot number 4 with 7 weeks when she was number 1 performer. And then if I now click on Sarah again, I will only see 7 bars. So these are the weeks and how much she sold for product C just for Sarah. In this report and in this chart, the grain of this chart is weekly. But I don't want to do it just at the weekly grain. I want to be able to look into my top performers by month or by quarter, but define the top performers the same way. Number 1 person that calendar week. Now that we understand what we're trying to do, let's take a look at the logic that I use to implement it. And while we're doing it, we're going to learn about generate and TopN functions in DAX. So let's walk through the logic high level just to understand our approach. So what I want to be able to do is create a table at the week grain, and for every week I want to find the top person and create a table where first column is week, second column is top person, and third column, let's say, is sales. So what that allows me to do is the following. When I'm looking at things weekly, obviously there's only going to be 1 top salesperson. But in a month I may have 4 or 5 weeks, so I may have 4 or 5 different salespeople who in one of those weeks became number 1. So I'm looking at the month grain, I may be able to see 1 or 5 different people who achieved that status. So building that table by week by salesperson allows me to deal with multiple grains in my report. So once I have a table that for every week lists the top salesperson, all I need to do is look up the current salesperson that I have in my table and see if that salesperson is on a list for the top salesperson for this week or in all the weeks that fit into this particular month. Hopefully this makes sense. Again, please download all of the materials, take a look at the DAX code, and hopefully if you practice a little bit, it'll make a little bit more sense. So let's take a look at the actual DAX and see how this logic works. So now we're about to learn about TopN and generate functions. Let's take a look at what we're doing here. So we're going to start out with the values function. And what this does, it just returns a list of all of the unique week numbers in our dataset. Now let's look at the second argument of our generate function, and that's this TopN command. So what TopN will do is, the first argument tells us how many top we're looking for. We're looking at top 1, so the number 1 salesperson. And then we're going to do a top 1 in a temporary table that works in the following way. We're going to create a temporary table with just the names of all of the salespeople, or list of all of the salespeople. And then for all of the salespeople, we're going to add one more column, call it weekly sales. And we're going to add our sales measure, and that measure just does the sum of sales. So when this command works, we're going to be able to see all of the salespeople and all of their sales. To make things easier to understand, let me break this whole calculation into sub-steps and run individual sub-steps in DAX Studio so you guys can understand what is happening. So here's my evaluate on add columns. So I'm just going to run add columns with values for salesperson ID and add sales to it. So what this will do, it'll create a temp table. In the first column, we're only going to have all of the values for salesperson ID. So it'll have unique number of salesperson IDs. And then it's going to calculate sales for each salesperson. And we're going to name that column weekly sales. If we just had the code as is, it's going to calculate weekly sales. We're calling it weekly sales, but effectively it's just sales given to whatever time period that we have selected in the report. However, this is where the generate command comes in. And what generate will do, it will execute this add columns command for every row in our values date week number table. So what it's going to do, it's going to say, how many rows do I have in this table, date, week number? And then for every row, it's going to run the add columns command, and it's going to concatenate all of those results into a single table. However, I don't want to see all of the salespeople for every week. I only want to see the top salesperson. So that's where the TopN command comes in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the table for all of the sales for that week, and then I'm going to get the first one, so the top salesperson. So when I'm done with this command, for every week I'm going to see only one salesperson and his or her sales. So let's run this now in DAX Studio and see what the result looks like. So let's see what this command returns. So we have generate that will create that table for every week with the top salesperson, and you will see that I also run it with the calculate table command because I want to make sure that generate occurs for all salespeople. With calculate table function, I'm making sure that I'm always looking at all salespeople as I'm executing this TopN logic. And let's take a look at the result. So now you see that for every week, that's what we're trying to do. We have the salesperson with the highest sales, and we also have the sales. So now I have the table that allows me to do the rest of my calculations. So once I have that table handy, and I'm going to write that table into a variable, call it top sellers, then I'm going to check for every person and for every salesperson and see if that person is contained in my table. If my grain of time is 1 week, this table will only contain one record, but if my grain is a quarter, I might have several names in that table. And then at the end, I say if I find my selected person in that table, then return 1, and if I don't find it, return 0. I could have used yes, no, or I could have used true, false, but I chose to use 1 or 0, and I will explain why a little bit later. So now, after all this, my isTopSalesperson variable, measure rather, will return 1 if my salesperson is a top salesperson given the time selected or not. Lastly, I implement top performer count, and that will return how many weeks this particular salesperson was a top performer. You will see that the logic is very similar. We're starting out creating our top sellers table and saving it into a top sellers variable. And then we're going to count rows in that table. We just need to make sure that in this table weekly sales are greater than 0, and we're only counting for our selected salesperson. So at the end of this calculation, we know exactly how many weeks a selected individual has been a top performer. Now we're almost at the tail's end of this video. We are just going to verify and make sure again that we understand how our calculations work. So here I've just created a very simple chart where I'm training my salespeople, and then I just brought my top performer count variable here so I could see how many times my salespeople were top performers. Here in the bottom, all I want to do is for every week, I just want to see one name. So I don't want to see salespeople who were not top performers. How did I do that? Well, all I had to do was add my isTopSalesperson variable to the chart, to the filter on the chart. And this is where there is an explanation why I used 1 or 0 and I did not use yes or no. So if you want to be able to filter by a measure, it needs to be a number. By me specifying 0 or 1, I'm able to specify these filter values in this area here. Had the variable returned a string, I would not be able to specify it here. It just didn't give me an option. So the way I set up this chart is I just brought in my week number, I brought in my salesperson in here, and I'm only filtering salespeople who are a top performer that week. So this is why you see only one person per week. Then I just drill down. So initially you just see everything broken down by a week. Then you just click on drill down or expand all down, and then you're going to be able to see only one salesperson per week because we're filtering for top salesperson in the chart. That's about it for this video. Again, you can download all of the materials on my blog. Look for the link in the description of the video. Thank you for stopping by and looking forward to see you back soon. Bye.